Before crossing the street, Dorothy looked both ways and slowly headed to the hotel building, which rose quite likely above anyone who stopped in front of its entrance. For a second, the old lady hesitated, but despite it, she climbed the marble steps and pulled in a knob. She entered the spacious, brightly lit hall. At the reception with a bored look stood a girl of about 25 and enthusiastically chatting with someone on a phone. But when she noticed the old lady in a battered coat squeezing a shabby bag, the reception girl put the phone aside. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" For a moment, Dorothy tensed, and then, gathering herself together, replied, "I would like to book a room in your hotel, if it's possible. Megan Matthews has been working here for 3 months, and accustomed to the fact that the guests, for the most part, were well-to-do people." But looking to the poorly dressed old lady, she squeamishly winced and shook her head negatively. "Sorry, at the moment we do not have any available rooms," she added, and with a fake indifference, began to read the registration log. It was obvious from her face that she took Dorothy for another beggar who had come here to ask for alms from hotel guests. "Listen, miss, I walked a long way to here, and the resting is crucial for me," the old lady said, from whose side hadn't escaped a number of keys to 3 rooms behind the counter. Dorothy pulled the battered purse out of the bowels of her purse and prepared to count the necessary amount to the administrator. Megan, who didn't expect such agility from the wretched old lady, was immediately confused and turned red. "It seems to me that you did not understand. We are not the hostel for vagrants, and do not intend to provide shelter to every single man," replied the administrator girl, making it clear in no uncertain terms that the conversation is over. As a response to it, Dorothy pursed her lip touchily and demanded to call hotel manager. However, Megan knew from experience that it should be prevented, because Mr. Price would be dissatisfied with the fact that he was bothered this late. That's why the administrator girl didn't come up with anything better than to call a guard to kick the elderly beggar out the door. Tears instantly welled up in her eyes, and lips treacherously trembled. It was clear that she didn't expect such treatment in one of the best Chicago hotels. The guard obviously very upset that he had to do this unpleasant mission. "What do you think you're doing? That is a natural outrage!" exclaimed Dorothy, knowing full well that hardly anyone would listen to her words. Fortunately, at the moment a young cleaner came out of the utility room and was very outraged by everything that was happening. Taking the guard for his jacket's lapel, April asked, "John, no need. Please, don't you see that she's not well? Go to your post. I will escort her out." A satisfied smile slid across the guard's face, as if the whole evening he had been waiting for it. Meanwhile, April took the old lady to her back room and sat her down on a chair. "Ma'am, wait here, please. The shift is soon over, and my husband will drive up to me. It's late already, so I invite you to stay at our place," the girl added, and encouragingly smiled to Mrs. Brooks. Dorothy looked at her unexpected savior with gratitude and quietly thanked her for the help. Soon as April promised, at the back entrance of the hotel, an old Chevrolet slowed down, driven by a young guy. To Mrs. Brooks' surprise, he didn't come out to meet April, and invitingly flashing the headlights stayed in the salon of the car. Only when Dorothy sat into the Chevrolet back seat, she realized that April's husband was disabled and drove a car equipped with manual control. "Oh, don't be embarrassed, ma'am. I used that people react to my disease this way," Stephen replies, catching the old woman's gaze, and started the engine. As it turned out, April's husband was a driver of a heavy truck trailer, making transportation to all regions in the country in the past. Once, when he was driving back after a prolonged trip, Stephen got into a terrible car accident, the result of which was his disability. At the same time, during releasing from the hospital, doctors vaguely hinted at ability of surgical operation, which cost a lot of money. Of course, Stephen didn't have such sum with him. Since the guy couldn't do anything other than driving, he decided to take a loan in a bank to buy a car with manual control. That is how Stephen got the steady Chevrolet, on which he had wheeled around the entire city, fulfilling director's instructions. At the same time, this young couple has 2 gorgeous children, whose names were Molly and Peter. On the way home, April went to tell Dorothy how smart and pretty they were. The young people lived in an old house on wheels in the roughest area of the city, where getting outside after dark was very unsafe. This was explained by the fact that April was an orphan, and Stephen in turn grew up in a dysfunctional family. For this reason, there was nobody to help the young people. Fortunately, while parents were at work, the neighbor woman, who treated the children with understanding and participation, was looking after them. Even though Mrs. Brooks didn't want to embarrass April and Stephen with her presence, they still persuaded her to stay overnight. Peter and Molly were so glad about the guest that in the middle of the game they even called her a grandmother. Mrs. Brooks was very pleased that she was so warmly received by complete strangers to her, who did not care about the appearance of the guest or the contents of her wallet. The old lady felt that in April's home she was treated as a part of the family, for who didn't exist any of restrictions. Mrs. Brooks didn't abuse the hospitality of the people who sheltered her and decided to move out the next morning. But before this, she woke Stephen up and, conspiratorially lowering her voice, asked him for one favor. To the surprise of a sleepy guy, Dorothy Brooks decided to revisit the hotel from which he was disgracefully kicked out yesterday. Not knowing about old lady's plans, Stephen did what she asked, and less than half an hour had passed, his Chevrolet was standing at the main entrance. This time, Dorothy's steps were confident and aimful. From the outside, it seemed that her tiny body was filled with some special strength, and literally hovered above the ground. After passing the brightly lit lobby, Mrs. Brooks walked back to the front desk. However, this time, Administrator Girl wasn't at her workplace, because she was standing a bit further, trying to satisfy the manager of the hotel. Megan Matthews had already filled her chest with air to let go of an angry tirade of the annoying beggar. But Dorothy was ahead of her. "Brandon, why is my hotel in such a mess? Did I appoint you as a manager for this, so that normal people could not rent a number in it?" With metallic notes in voice asked Mrs. Brooks. From such insolence, the Administrator Girl blushed. But Brandon Price immediately beseeched her and hurried to crumble an apology to Dorothy Brooks. As it turned out later, and inconspicuous at first glance, the old lady was the real owner of the hotel, which used to be part of her husband's business. After he died in a car accident a decade ago, Mrs. Brooks had spearheaded the family business. Of course, Dorothy could pass it to her son, but her guy was living abroad, and being an art-bonded man, didn't want to burden himself with the business affairs. In this way, the management of the hotel passed to Mrs. Brooks' hands. Everything was going fine, but then, about half a year ago, guests started to send complaints about service personnel of the hotel. As the person of distrust and prudence, Dorothy Brooks was in no hurry to believe the rumors. But when they spread throughout the city, she decided to make sure of everything herself. For this purpose exactly, she made Huldy's masquerade with changing clothes and came to her own hotel under beggar cover. Despite all Brandon Price's pleas, Mrs. Brooks fired him from manager place, and together with Administrator Girl, kicked him out. Such haste of conclusions was explained by the fact that Dorothy had already found the suitable candidate for the role of manager, and her name, certainly, was April. When Cleaner Girl found out whom Dorothy actually was, her amazement knew no bounds. But those weren't all surprises Mrs. Brooks prepared for her new friends. First of all, businesswoman called a private clinic, where she arranged for an operation for Stephen. At the same time, all the costs associated with treatment and following rehabilitation, Dorothy Brooks assumed. Senior businesswoman was always used to respond kindly for good, and knew that helping April's family, she did the right thing. The fruit of her kindness Mrs. Brooks was able to see only 6 months later, when Stephen, leaning on a stick, took his first timid steps. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. After all, if it weren't you, we wouldn't have all of this," said April, with tears of gratitude in her eyes. In response to this, Dorothy smiled slyly and said that for the fact that she got such a diligent worker and a loyal friend in her staff, she paid very little, and all the good things are still ahead.